Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. A new nuclear arms race is underway, one that will take you by surprise. Now, Pakistan, which at this moment is believed to have about 170 nuclear weapons, is increasing its nuclear arsenal to about 200 nuclear bombs by 2025. According to the Federation of American Scientists Nuclear Information Report, Pakistan is expanding its uranium enrichment infrastructure. But the question is why? And do you know who else is expanding their nuclear arsenal? Well, China is also expanding its nuclear arsenal at a pretty furious pace. Now, Beijing, it appears, wants to match the American nuclear arsenal in the days to come. But what most people find baffling at this moment is why Pakistan, given its economic condition, is increasing the number of nuclear bombs in its possession. Is Pakistan expanding its nuclear arsenal? According to an American think tank, the Federation of American Scientists, Pakistan, it appears, is gradually expanding its nuclear arsenal. With more warheads, more delivery systems, and a growing fissile material production industry. On the basis of commercial satellite images, Pakistan appears to be building new army garrisons and air force bases, with new launchers and facilities linked to its expanding nuclear arsenal. At this moment, Pakistan is widely believed to possess a total of 170 atomic weapons. And according to estimates by the Federation of American Scientists, by 2025, that is in the next 2 years, Pakistan could bump up its nuclear arsenal to 200 weapons. But what explains the steady expansion of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal? And more importantly, why is Pakistan engaged in expanding its nuclear arsenal now? Ever since Pakistan simultaneously carried out 5 nuclear tests on the 28th of May in 1998 at the Rasko Hills in the Chagai district of Balochistan province in an operation that was codenamed Chagai-1, no one has had any doubts about Pakistan's nuclear capabilities. In 1999, the United States intelligence agencies had predicted that Pakistan will have about 60 to 80 warheads by 2020. But Islamabad seems to have beaten the American assessments. But is Pakistan sparking a new nuclear arms race in South Asia? This is a question for which there are no easy or immediate answers. India at this moment is widely believed to have about 165 nuclear warheads. Where Pakistan keeps its nuclear weapons is fairly well known. This map shows you the 4 air bases where Pakistan stations its nuclear-capable fighter jets, while this map will give you an idea of the missile garrisons from where Pakistan can launch its nuclear missiles. Islamabad also has submarines through which it can launch nuclear cruise missiles. Like the United States, Russia, the United Kingdom and France, Pakistan does not adhere to the no first use policy as part of its nuclear doctrine, while India and China are the only 2 nuclear powers to formally abide by the no first use nuclear doctrine. One other nation that at this moment is furiously expanding its nuclear arsenal is China. According to a Pentagon report on China's military power, Beijing, which at this moment has about 400 nuclear warheads, will scale up its nuclear arsenal to 700 warheads by 2027. And by 2035, Beijing will have a minimum of 1,500 warheads that it can deploy. China's furious expansion of its nuclear arsenal is driven by a desire for parity with the United States. But what most analysts find baffling is why Pakistan, given its dire financial condition at this moment, is expanding its nuclear warheads, because it costs money and resources to keep and maintain nuclear weapons. Kim Jong-un's visit to Russia has dominated the headlines this past week. But the question that few have an answer for is how much ammunition does Pyongyang have that it can spare? And what is Kim Jong-un getting in return? So as Russia has been shoring up its ammunition, Kiev has continued with its steady push towards the Crimean peninsula. In a pre-dawn missile strike, Kiev struck the port of Sevastopol, damaging a large Russian ship and a submarine. But the question is this: how much longer can Ukraine, with its defense manpower and ammunition, push ahead with its counteroffensive. Night after night, as Russian drones and missiles pierced through the Ukrainian skies and wreaked devastation over the Ukrainian cities, the Ukrainian Defense Forces have just one objective in hand, and that is to shoot down the Russian projectiles that have heaped unimaginable misery across Ukraine. As this video by the Ukrainian Defense Forces will show you, despite the weapons being pumped in by the United States and its allies to help Ukraine, keeping the Ukrainian skies safe is not an easy task. On the 13th of September, Russia bombed the Izmail port on the Danube River. But Kiev too has managed to strike deep inside the Russian territory. On the 11th of September, the Ukrainian forces put out this video with the audacious claim that Kiev had managed to regain control of several oil and gas offshore drilling platforms close to Crimea, known as the Boiko towers. There is no way to independently verify these claims, but according to Kiev's account, the Ukrainian soldiers managed to overwhelm the Russians and force them to retreat. But Ukraine's biggest success this week has been the pre-dawn missile attack on the Sevastopol shipyard in the Crimean peninsula. A total of 10 missiles and 3 speedboats were used in this operation. This strategic shipyard on the Crimean peninsula has been instrumental in repairing and building ships and submarines for Russia's Black Sea Fleet. And according to satellite imagery, it has emerged that the Minsk Project 775 Rapucha class landing ship and the Rostov-on-Don Kilo class submarine have sustained some serious damages. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky congratulated the Ukrainian soldiers for the alleged destruction of a Russian air defense system in the Crimean peninsula.
A special mention should be made to the entire personnel of the security service of Ukraine, as well as our naval forces. I thank you for today's triumph. The invaders' air defense system on the Crimean land was destroyed. Very significant. Well done. Glory to all who fight for Ukraine, and thanks to everyone who helps.
Only those who have their heads buried in sand are convinced that the war in Ukraine will not spill beyond the borders of Ukraine. Eurofighters from Italy and Spain performed the policing mission over the Baltics, while Russia's strategic bombers patrolled over the Barents and the Norwegian seas. No one at this moment can predict as to how widespread this conflict can become or how long it can drag on. But the Russian president believes that the war in Ukraine will end only when Kiev runs out of resources. The American General Mark Milley has already made a grim assessment. According to him, the Ukrainian counteroffensive can last for only just another 30 days, because once the cold begins to set in, the battle lines will freeze again. Lebanon's largest Palestinian refugee camp has been rocked by violence since the 7th of September. The fighting between the secular Fatah movement and the hardline Islamist groups intensified on Wednesday as a ceasefire was violated. At least about 7 people were killed on Wednesday, taking the total death toll to over 16 since the fighting resumed on the 7th of September. Hundreds of families are being displaced from the camp, seeking refuge in nearby mosques, schools, and also the Sidon municipality building. The refugee camp, Ain al-Hilwe, was rocked by 5 days of deadly fighting just weeks ago, in which 13 more people had died. So the question is this: what has led to these violent clashes between the rival factions in the largest Palestinian refugee camp in southern Lebanon? Our next report gets you more details.
Ain al-Hilwe, the largest Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, is on the edge. Smoke billowed and gunshots rang out in the narrow alleys of the crowded camp on Wednesday evening. At least 7 people were killed and 16 wounded as clashes intensified between members of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah movement and Islamist militants. Ain al-Hilwe, on the outskirts of the southern city of Sidon, has been rocked by violence since the 7th of September. It is home to more than 63,000 registered refugees, though some estimates peg the number even higher. Hundreds of Palestinian families have now fled the camp, seeking refuge in nearby mosques, schools and the Sidon municipality building. Noteworthy is the work being done by Palestinian Red Crescent paramedics, who have set up stations at the camp's entrance to treat the wounded and provide food packages to displaced families.
We have several groups at the entrances of the camp, and there is also a team right here. We are here for the displaced. So if there are displaced who come, who are wounded and whatnot, we work with them. We treat the wounded and take them to hospitals.
Barely weeks ago, Ain al-Hilweh had been rocked by 5 days of street battles between the rival factions. After the Fatah accused Islamist groups Jund al-Sham and Shabab al-Muslim of gunning down one of their military generals, Mohammed al-Armoushi, on the 30th of July. The uneasy truce in place since the 3rd of August was increasingly in danger of being broken, since the Islamist groups have not handed over the accused killers of al-Armoushi to the Lebanese judiciary, a key demand by a committee of Palestinian factions. On the 5th of September, the committee had announced that their joint security forces would launch raids in search of the accused killers. Islamist groups, in an attempt to forestall plans by the Palestinian forces, had launched an attack on the 7th of September. As clashes intensified, scores of civilians were forced to flee to safer areas.
As soon as the bombing started, we left immediately. We fled in panic. Even accidents happened on the road. People fell on the streets. Most people left. We couldn't believe how we ran out with our children. I have 4 children and 6 of my nephews. Only God knows how we have escaped.
Close to 100 sustained injuries in this desperate scrabble for survival. Among the wounded is 16-year-old Sabine Al-Ahmad, who had fled the camp with her family.
We were running away and a shell exploded over us. The shrapnel burst and I got wounded.
Close to 400,000 Palestinian refugees live in Lebanon's 12 refugee camps, dating back to the 1948 war between Israel and its Arab neighbors. These camps, including the Ain al-Hilweh, largely lie outside the jurisdiction of the Lebanese security forces. Factional disputes spiraling into deadly violence are a common occurrence in the Ain al-Hilweh camp. If this latest cycle of violence doesn't end soon, chances are many more will meet the same fate as 16-year-old Sabine, or maybe even worse.
Insurgency is on the rise in the impoverished West African nation of Mali, especially in its northern and central regions. On the 7th of September, attacks on an army base and a passenger boat on the Niger River in northern Mali by suspected jihadists killed about 64 people. The assaults were claimed by a group that is said to be affiliated to the Al-Qaeda. The very next day, a suicide attack targeted a military base in northern Mali. And on the 12th of September, armed groups from northern Mali claimed to have captured the key town of Borem following fighting with the Malian army. Now, given the resumption of hostilities in the north, the junta has cancelled the Independence Day celebrations that were planned for the next week. Our next report gets you more details.
The landlocked, impoverished Republic of Mali has been wrestling with insecurity since 2012. When a revolt led by ethnic Tuaregs erupted in the north of the country, the insurgency was stoked up by jihadists, who 3 years later took their own campaign into central Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso, thereby sending shockwaves across the Sahel region. The Northern Rebellion formally came to an end in 2015 with the signing of a peace agreement between the region's rebels and the Malian government. The fragile deal, known as Algiers Agreement, has been increasingly under strain since the toppling of the civilian government in 2020.
The Malian crisis is a crisis that's been going on for over a decade. And now, under the current political circumstances, the crisis has been intensifying again after a lull of around 8 years, we can say. And this lull was mainly due to the fact that the international forces were making some difference in terms of keeping jihadists at bay to a certain degree. Now, the attacks that took place, they took place in northern Mali, and northern Mali was where a lot of the French forces were concentrated, and the UN forces were also heavily concentrated in these areas. Northern Mali was also the region that was the source of the Malian crisis initially, more than a decade ago.
The UN peacekeeping mission, known as MINUSMA, has to exit Mali by the end of the year and has already handed over 2 bases near Timbuktu to the armed forces. Given the impending pullout, the region has witnessed a resurgence in tensions in recent weeks. First, on the 7th of September, in 2 separate attacks targeting a ferry on the Niger River and an army base at Bamba in the northern Gao region. 49 civilians and 15 soldiers were killed. The targeted vessel was plying a route between cities along the Niger, a crucial transport route in a region where railways are absent and the road infrastructure is in abysmal condition. Reportedly, the vessel was targeted by at least 3 rockets, which aimed at its engines.
The boat stopped abruptly because the engine had been damaged by a bomb. And that's when they started shooting at us, and people started jumping into the water, including those who couldn't swim, and most of those who decided to do so drowned.
A suicide attack targeted an airport area of a military base the next day in northern Mali, killing 10 soldiers. And on Tuesday, the key town of Baurim, which lies on the road between the ancient city of Timbuktu and Gao, was captured by the Permanent Strategic Framework, or CSP, a coalition of armed factions before they pulled out. Rivalries between the multitude of armed actors vying for control of the north have recently intensified, fueling fears of a collapse of the peace deal between the ex-rebels and government forces.
The Ecuadorian police defused an explosive-laden drone on the roof of a prison on the 12th of September. Now, the drone, believe it or not, landed on the roof of the Roca maximum security prison in Guayaquil. The prison is infamous for housing some of the most dangerous criminals, including the 6 Colombians suspected of killing the presidential hopeful Fernando Villavicencio last month. Now, for an impoverished nation that is battling the powerful narco gangs, the increasing usage of drones and submarines by criminals is a very worrying trend. Our next poll gets you more details.
This dramatic visual of an explosives-laden drone being blown to smithereens tells a few tales. Firstly, it speaks of a newfound resolve of the Ecuadorian security forces to fight the narco gangs. But it is also indicative of the innovative ways and usage of modern technology the narco gangs are employing to conduct their nefarious business. Up until a few years ago, Ecuador was a peaceful heaven nestled between world's largest cocaine producers, Colombia and Mexico. The poor South American nation, though, descended into violence as it itself was crowned as the new hub for drug trafficking. Its strategic location, large ports, lax security and endemic corruption lured foreign drug cartels to its shore. These drug cartels have increasingly felt the heat of war on drugs in countries like Mexico and Colombia, thereby turning their attention to a nation like Ecuador. Ecuadorian prisons have turned into veritable battlegrounds between these narco gangs. Rival gangs with links to Colombia and Mexican drug cartels frequently clash with each other in prisons. More than 430 inmates have been killed in these turf wars since 2021, often leaving a trail of burned and dismembered bodies. No place exemplified this descent more than Guayaquil, Ecuador's biggest city and home to the country's biggest port. Guayaquil has rapidly ascended to become the epicenter of Ecuador's crime problems, as narco gangs took advantage of its location and logistics to ship drugs abroad. With infinite cash at their disposal and international connections, they soon acquired cutting-edge technology, whether it be in the form of sophisticated weaponry, drones, low-profile go-fast vessels, or even submarines. What exactly has been the response of the Ecuadorian government? Not only has it talked tough, but according to President Guillermo Lasso, in the 28 months of his mandate, $429 million have been allocated for the equipment of the Army, Navy, and the Ecuadorian Air Force. Additionally, until 2026, a little over $1 billion will be financed for the operational capacity of the armed forces. On the 11th of September, Ecuador took delivery of 20 Cobra II tactical military vehicles, which will no doubt improve defense and bolster security.
Today I am pleased to deliver these 20 Turkish-made Cobra vehicles. These are part of the 35 we have already purchased. The next 15 will arrive in the month of October. Weeks ago, we made the delivery of 20 multi-purpose armored vehicles and 42 all-terrain vehicles. This fleet will serve for the defense of our sovereignty and our security. I'm one of those who firmly believe that there is no republic without a public force, and that the institutional strengthening of Ecuador begins by strengthening our armed forces all the time.
The equipment will be used in various missions and in different, difficult terrains. For a poor country like Ecuador, the fight against the lucrative drug trade is a mammoth task. But from the appearances of it, it sure is bracing for a long, tough fight.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're looking at on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.